Narra, beyond imagination.
Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving headfirst into the Jeffrey Epstein files that were just unsealed. We're talking about thousands of pages of court documents that are finally seeing the light of day, and they're painting an even darker picture of his world and the powerful people caught in his orbit. So, what if I told you there was a secret thread connecting some of the world's most powerful people? Presidents, billionaires, even royalty. All back to one single man. A man who somehow ran this massive criminal enterprise right out in the open for decades. And the whole time, the people around him, well, they either didn't see it, or maybe they just chose to look the other way. That's really the mystery we're trying to unravel with these files. So, why is this blowing up all over again? It's simple, really. After years and years of legal fights, the floodgates have opened. These court documents have finally been unsealed, and they publicly name over 150 people connected to Epstein. And that number, that sheer scale, tells you right away, this was never, ever just about one guy. Okay, so to really get what's going on, we have to look at what these files are actually telling us. This isn't just, a biography of some criminal. It's more like a map of a network that connected the absolute peaks of global power and finance with the absolute darkest depths of criminal activity. To understand how this all happened, you've really got to look at the two sides of Jeffrey Epstein. On the one hand, you had his public persona, the mysterious Wall Street whiz, the guy who was friends with everybody important, the philanthropist donating to science. But then there was the private reality, the predator, the abuser, the mastermind behind a huge sex trafficking operation. It was that public mask, that veneer of legitimacy that let him get away with it for so long. So let's get into the mechanics of it. How did this whole criminal enterprise actually work? Because when you look at the details, you see it wasn't just random acts. No, this was a highly organized, almost machine-like system, and it was built for one purpose: abuse. Investigators have called this thing a sex trafficking pyramid scheme, and that term is horrifyingly accurate. Why a pyramid scheme? Because it was designed to keep feeding itself. Victims weren't just the targets of abuse, they were then manipulated, pressured, and forced to become recruiters themselves. They were coerced into finding other, often younger girls, just expanding that web of abuse over and over again. Okay, so here's how the scheme actually played out, step by step. First, recruiters would find vulnerable girls. Then came the lure, promises of easy money, like $200 for a massage, plus travel and this illusion of a better life. Once they were isolated at one of Epstein's mansions or his private island, the abuse would begin. And the final, sickening step, they were forced to recruit others, perpetuating this horrible cycle. And right at the heart of this entire recruitment machine was Ghislaine Maxwell. It's so important to understand she wasn't just a sidekick or a partner. No, according to both victims and prosecutors, she was the primary enabler, a key player. She used her high society status to gain trust, to groom, and to lure underage girls into this web. And for that role, she's now serving a 20-year prison sentence. So this all begs a huge question, right? If this operation was so big, so organized, how in the world did it go on for decades without anyone stopping it? Well, that leads us to the next part of this story, a complete and utter failure of the justice system. Let's go back to 2005. The first official investigation kicks off thanks to a tip to the Palm Beach police. By 2006, the evidence is just piling up, so much so that the FBI opens their own case. With that kind of evidence, you'd think he'd be facing life in prison, right? Wrong. Instead, by 2008, a secret plea deal gets cut. And the result of all that? Epstein serves a measly 13 months in a county jail. And when you look at the terms of this deal, it's just unbelievable. They called it the sweetheart deal, and for good reason. He completely dodged the serious federal charges. He was sentenced to just 18 months, and get this, he was allowed to leave for work release 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. But here's the real kicker. The deal gave him and any of his potential co-conspirators total immunity from any future federal prosecution. And the victims? Nobody even told them this deal was happening. The former police chief in Palm Beach said it perfectly. He said this was not a he said, she said situation. This was 50-some she's and one he. And the she's all told the same story. Think about that. Law enforcement had a mountain of evidence, dozens of victims, all telling the exact same horrifying story. And yet, the system completely and totally failed them.
Which, of course, brings us to where we are today. We're left with this legacy of just so many unanswered questions. Because Epstein's death in 2019, it didn't end the story, not by a long shot. In a lot of ways, it just made the mystery even deeper.
So, fast forward to 2019. Thanks to some incredible, relentless reporting, the case gets blown wide open again. Epstein is arrested, this time on federal sex trafficking charges. It looked like justice might finally be coming. But then, just a month later, he's found dead in his jail cell. And just like that, it was over. No trial, no cross-examination, and for his countless victims, no day in court to face their abuser.
Okay, so what about all the famous names popping up in these files? This is a really important point, so let's be clear. For the vast majority of them, they are not being accused of a crime. Their names are there because they were on flight logs for Epstein's private jet, or maybe a victim mentioned they were at one of his houses when the abuse was happening. So for most, these files don't prove guilt. What they do is raise one giant, unavoidable question. What did these powerful people know, and what did they see?
And that leads us right into this major theory that's been swirling around this case for years. Was this whole twisted operation just about sexual abuse? Or was it also about something else? Blackmail. The suspicion has always been that Epstein had cameras hidden everywhere, that he was secretly recording his powerful guests to get dirt on them, to get leverage, to make sure they'd stay silent and complicit. And these newly unsealed documents, they're just throwing more fuel on that fire.
And so here we are, left with the biggest question of all. With Epstein dead and gone, what happens to the powerful people in his orbit? The ones who might have witnessed things, the ones who enabled him, or maybe even the ones who participated in his crimes. Will they ever face any real accountability? That, right there, is the huge, unanswered question at the very heart of this scandal.